Can you imagine it? In the middle of summer 2025, when global tourism is exploding again, the United States suddenly finds itself turned away by the world. Airports that once buzzed like swarming hives are now as silent as graveyards. Baggage carousels stand still, and the loudspeakers repeat their announcements in vain. Even more chilling, within less than 12 months, 10 international airlines have quietly withdrawn from the U.S. market without a single word of explanation, resulting in a 35% drop in international arrivals, an unprecedented figure in American aviation history. Experts have begun to warn America is being erased from the world map, in a way no one could have foreseen. The question is, what on earth is happening? How could a superpower once hailed as the capital of global tourism spiral downward so fast? 1. PLAY Airlines, the disappearance from the Nordic skies. Do you still remember the legendary $99 journeys from Iceland to Boston once offered by PLAY Airlines? It used to be the top choice for European youth dreaming of discovering America, fast, cheap, and full of exploration spirit. From Reykjavik to New York, the distance was once shortened with a single click and a red ticket bearing the PLAY logo. But by March 2025, that entire network suddenly vanished without a trace. No press release, no farewell letter, only a chilling void left behind on the flight map. And the consequences were obvious. The number of passengers from Northern Europe to the U.S. dropped by more than 60% in less than 12 months. A shockwave that startled even the most seasoned aviation experts. People blamed the global economy, but the truth goes deeper. A survey by the European Travel Commission revealed that 71% of Nordic tourists now choose Canada or Japan instead of the U.S. Not because they no longer love America, but because they no longer feel safe or respected when visiting. They fear social instability, absurd extra costs, expensive health care, and an emergency system lacking empathy. A veteran tour guide in Reykjavik once appeared on television saying he used to take hundreds of travelers to New York every month, but now he only recommends Tokyo or Vancouver. The reason he fears they will suffer from culture shock, financial shock, and even shock from the way they're treated at the airport. To them, he said, coming to America is no longer a dream, but a gamble with their own safety and dignity. Once the #1 destination for Nordic tourists in 2015, now visa applications from Iceland to the U.S. have dropped 48%, while those to South Korea and Canada have more than doubled. And perhaps the most frightening thing is not that America is losing money, but that it is losing warmth, hospitality, and trust, things that no first-class ticket can buy back. And if even a small but symbolic airline like PLAY Airlines has chosen to turn away, then what is really waiting for America ahead? 2. When the neighbor to the north also turns away. If the withdrawal of a small airline like PLAY Airlines from the U.S. surprised you, then get ready for a bigger shock. Air Canada and WestJet, two giants of Canadian aviation, have also begun their retreat. In 2025 alone, more than 40% of their flights to the U.S. have been cut. Not minor routes, but key destinations that once brought millions of Canadians down to sunny Florida each winter. Orlando, Las Vegas, New York, Los Angeles, now exist only in memory. This is no longer a strategic adjustment. This is a calculated withdrawal. For the first time in history, the number of domestic flights within Canada has surpassed flights to the U.S., and that reflects a bitter truth. Canadians no longer feel safe setting foot on American soil. A mother in Ottawa, who used to take her children to Disneyland every year, told CBC that she no longer dares to bring her kids to the U.S., not because of money, but because she cannot predict what awaits them across the border. And that is not an isolated opinion. According to a report from Destination Canada, 69% of Canadians over the age of 50 say they no longer consider the U.S. a safe destination, and 48% of those who visited the U.S. in the past decade say they will not return. What has made a country that once saw America as its familiar backyard decide to turn away not politics, not conflicting ideals, but a reality that is overpriced, overwhelming, and frightening. A hotel room in downtown Los Angeles costs $150 per night, plus $60 for parking with layered service fees stacked like tourist traps. With that same amount, Canadians can stay at a lakeside resort in Vancouver or Quebec. Peaceful, clean breakfast included, and no sirens screaming outside the window. The U.S. has not only lost its edge in pricing, it is also losing something more crucial: the feeling of being welcomed. A place once ideal for families to escape the winter sun now causes hesitation, out of fear of seeing a homeless camp right next to a theme park. More alarming is this. This is not a loud goodbye. Canada, like an old friend, no longer wanting to argue, simply closes the suitcase, cancels the ticket, and it is the closing bell for an era when America was seen as the irreplaceable center of global tourism. And if even the closest neighbor chooses to walk away, what will happen when it's the turn of countries that once considered the U.S. a long-standing strategic partner? The answer is already emerging, silently but precisely, from the heart of Europe, where an aircraft operating with clockwork precision is quietly erasing the U.S. from its route. 3. Lufthansa, when Germany's precise machine quietly erases America. If you zoom in on the global flight map of 2025, you'll see a cold void slowly expanding, precise, silent, and deliberate in the way only Germans operate. Lufthansa, the emblem of European aviation, is quietly withdrawing its wings from U.S. airspace. Frankfurt, Chicago. Frankfurt, Atlanta. Frankfurt, Miami. Routes that once formed the backbone of transatlantic commerce, spanning decades and transporting millions of people, now gone without a trace from booking systems as if they never existed. A single tourist season passed, and an entire half of the map was wiped clean with just a few clicks. But the most unsettling part isn't what disappeared. It's where Lufthansa is now betting its future: Asia. They are boosting frequencies to Tokyo, Seoul, Delhi. The best time slots, the strongest fleets, the most experienced pilots, all reassigned toward the east. Within Lufthansa's internal planning, the U.S. is no longer the core. That title now belongs to cities where trust and growth still walk side by side. A strategic executive at Lufthansa told Süddeutsche Zeitung a sentence as short as it is chilling. "We are not leaving the U.S. because we dislike it. We are leaving because there is no longer a reason to stay." In their view, America has become a high-risk gamble exchange. Rates fluctuate wildly. Airport fees are soaring uncontrollably. Visa procedures grow more tangled. Security costs escalate hourly. And the threat of protests or chaos at international terminals becomes increasingly unpredictable. In contrast to the heavy atmosphere in the U.S., Asia radiates an irresistible appeal: lower operational costs, stronger government backing a rapidly growing middle class, and above all, hospitality remains a cultural standard that cannot be replaced. A veteran Lufthansa captain who had flown transatlantic routes for over 20 years shared that whenever assigned a flight to Tokyo, he felt relieved. But if the schedule said Chicago or Houston, he mentally prepared himself: interrogation-like security checks, predatory taxis, tense passengers, and immigration officers who seemed to view everyone as a potential suspect. "I fly for a living," he said, "but I do not fly to be treated like a criminal." And if even pilots, who once considered a landing in New York the pinnacle of their careers, now just hope to avoid the U.S., how many passengers are quietly feeling the same without ever saying it aloud? Lufthansa was not pushed out of the United States. They left on their own terms, because they no longer saw America as worthy of their investment, their risk, or their trust. And when an airline known for loyalty, stability, and pragmatism like Lufthansa decides to pivot, this is no longer a tactical adjustment. It is a living proof of a silent global shift already underway. But what chills the spine even more: Lufthansa is not the only one beginning to see America through a different lens. Because the next carrier once embodied romance in the skies, journeys filled with wonder and a belief that America is where dreams are made. And if even they say goodbye, then perhaps that dream truly has ended. For Air France KLM, a farewell filled with poetry, yet bitter cold. If Lufthansa departed the U.S. like a calculated and emotionless machine, then Air France KLM withdrew like a past romance, quiet, melancholic, and filled with regret. No press release, no headline. Just one route after another fading gently from the system, as if America were slowly being erased from Europe's collective memory. In early 2025, this French-Dutch alliance quietly cut 30% to 45% of its total flights to the U.S. routes once considered icons of the transatlantic dream: Paris, New York, Amsterdam, Miami. Paris, Houston are now nothing more than deleted lines on the booking screen. Why did they leave? The reasons aren't so different from the other carriers: rising costs, tightening visa processes, increasing social unrest in the U.S. But with Air France, the story carries a more delicate shade, a feeling uniquely French disillusionment. A veteran captain from the airline shared with Le Monde. In the past, flying from Paris to New York was the pinnacle of a French pilot's career. Now I only feel at ease when assigned to Tokyo or Seoul. In Asia, he continued, passengers are not worried about being pickpocketed at the airport. No sudden protests erupt at the terminal gate. No taxi drivers demanding outrageous fees or customs officers casting suspicious glances. Flying to Tokyo, he concluded, feels like a refined journey. Flying to the U.S. feels like entering a confrontation with an entire system, and that sentiment isn't limited to the flight crew. According to internal reports from Air France, KLM seat occupancy on U.S.-bound flights has dropped below 70%, a red flag in the aviation industry enough to force any carrier to consider pivoting. Meanwhile, routes to Tokyo, Singapore, Seoul, even Mumbai have surged, far exceeding 2024's projections. A flight from Frankfurt to New York is now described as an obstacle course. Intense security screenings, chaotic protests outside the airport, rising logistics costs, and a sense of cold suspicion passengers feel the moment they land on American soil. In contrast, the Paris-Tokyo route feels like a symphony: streamlined processes, satisfied passengers, and a flight crew genuinely excited to take off. Air France did not abandon the U.S. out of resentment. They left because they no longer believed the dream was worth holding on to. And when even the French, once the embodiment of borderless romance, choose to walk away, then perhaps what America is losing is not just tourists, but the very image that once made the world dream. 5. Qantas, when the loyal companion also abandons its trust. Americans once had an ally who never asked questions, a friend who was always there when needed, from the battlefields of Iraq to the Pacific trade agreements. And in the skies, that unwavering presence bore the name Qantas, the national airline of Australia, also one of the oldest and most trusted airlines in the world. However, in the summer of 2025, Qantas announced a complete cut of all direct flights to Chicago and Dallas, two of the most important trade hubs between the two countries. No press conference, no accusations. Just a cold change in the schedule. America was no longer a priority destination. Instead, flights to Vancouver, Seoul, and Singapore were increased in frequency, equipped with next-generation aircraft and experienced crews. Australians did not get angry. They simply stopped. Because for them, travel is not just a journey. It is a relationship. And when that relationship becomes unstable, unpredictable, and expensive to the point of being uncontrollable, their reaction is always very Australian: silent but decisive. A new survey from Tourism Australia shows only 22% of Australians choose the U.S. as a destination in their travel plans for the next 3 years, down more than half compared to the pre-pandemic period. Destinations once considered must-go once in a lifetime, like New York, Las Vegas, or the Grand Canyon, are now replaced by Hokkaido, Vancouver, or even Iceland. And the reason is not in the exchange rate or airfare. It lies in the feeling. A mother in Sydney once recounted a bitter experience when she was detained at Los Angeles airport for more than 4 hours just because of an undeclared bottle of liquid form vitamins. Her son, 8 years old, screamed in panic upon seeing his mother separated for a personal belongings inspection. "I wasn't angry," she said. "I just felt heartbroken." My son's dream trip began with a nightmare. Qantas is not leaving the U.S. because they have weakened. On the contrary, they are rapidly expanding into East Asia, where they feel more respected, more effectively cooperated with, and face fewer risks. A senior executive of the airline admitted, "We can no longer operate an expensive, unfriendly, and full of uncertainty route like this." And that is what truly alarms the U.S. tourism industry when a partner like Qantas, a symbol of resilience, loyalty, and professionalism, also begins to question the value of flying to America. Then clearly the problem no longer lies in individual flights, but in the image of America itself in the eyes of the world. Qantas does not knock a second time to say goodbye. They simply delete the destination, and that void not every airline can fill. 6. JetBlue, when even the sky above its own homeland begins to close. Not Lufthansa, not Singapore Airlines, but JetBlue, a domestic carrier born to reinvent American aviation, is the next to declare we are pulling back. And the most painful part, they're not exiting international markets. They're withdrawing from their own country. In 2025, JetBlue quietly removed 15 domestic airports from its route map, from Syracuse to Worcester, from Kansas City to Fresno. Cities that may not be major hubs, but once served as vital arteries connecting rural America to urban centers and the heartland to the coasts. Now those terminals are void of jet engine noise. Just empty waiting chairs display boards frozen on no departures and automatic doors opening and closing to greet a passenger who will never come. JetBlue was once hailed as a breath of fresh air, a young creative airline that prioritized passengers. But in 2025, the winds began to shift. Fuel prices surged 41% compared to 2022. Pilot shortages intensified. Technicians and ground crew became scarce. Small airports turned into abandoned islands, disconnected and forgotten. And if you think this is just an economic equation, you're missing something deeper. A former JetBlue captain in Ohio said he had flown across more than 30 states, landing in places where every touchdown would bring out the whole town, as if witnessing a small miracle falling from the sky. Now those flights are gone, and the town has fallen silent, as if someone just turned off their last remaining light. When a state loses all its flights, you lose tourists. When a region is no longer connected by air, you lose emergency patients who need transport, students who want to study far from home, and elderly grandparents trying to visit their grandchildren across state lines. But when a country begins to abandon its own territories simply because they no longer generate profit, then you are no longer a nation. You become a scattered chain of isolated cities bound together by loneliness and neglect. And JetBlue was just the first to speak it aloud. According to FAA data, 38% of America's Tier 2 and Tier 3 airports have lost more than half of their daily flights. 6 major airlines have withdrawn entirely from at least one state. A nation once proud to claim you can fly from anywhere to anywhere is now quietly becoming a place where, in some parts, you simply can't leave by air, no matter your money, your reason, or your emergency. JetBlue never declared defeat. They simply said they're refocusing on major markets. But to millions of Americans in remote and rural areas, that's a clear signal they no longer belong to the skies. And if even domestic airlines begin pulling out from the heartland, what future remains for the countryside, the mountains, the small towns, where a single daily flight was their only bridge to the world? That answer is coming next, when even the smallest, quietest regional carriers, once the lifelines of these places, are now forced to admit we can't take off anymore. 7. United Airlines, when the heartbeat of America starts to fade. If JetBlue's withdrawal was an early warning, then United Airlines' move is a full-scale retreat, firm cold and utterly without remorse. In 2025, United announced the elimination of more than 30 domestic routes. And the most alarming part, they weren't targeting distant rural states. They targeted the core, regions once considered the steady pulse of America. Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wisconsin, removed from the flight map as if they had never existed. In total, over 1,200 monthly flights were erased. Nearly 1 million passengers lost access in just a few weeks. Routes that had existed for 40-50 years, serving farmers, small business owners, students, and those who couldn't drive hundreds of miles across states, vanished with a brief announcement. No negotiations, no detailed explanation. United called it urban market prioritization. In Springfield, the hometown of Abraham Lincoln, all United operations came to a halt. In Fargo, North Dakota, a city that had only a handful of flights each week, the airport has returned to being just that, an airport in name with no flights to offer. United blamed rising fuel costs, pilot shortages, and low passenger volume. But what they didn't say is the quiet pain of a nation cutting off its own arteries simply because they no longer generate profit. In these regions, losing air service isn't just about losing time, it's about losing access. A critical job interview. Too far, a graduation ceremony missed. An emergency medical flight no longer possible. Elders can't visit their children. Students can't return home. Entire communities feel pushed to the edge of the American map, not by weapons, but by empty flight boards. United isn't just canceling routes. They are severing the ties between social classes, between rural towns and metropolitan centers, between America's heart and the rest of its body. And if a country can no longer fly from its core to itself, is it still a united country? But if United's exit was a punch to the chest, then what's coming next is a blade straight to the artery. Because after the big carriers retreat, the next to fall are the small ones, the last to hold the line for rural America. And even they are beginning to let go. 8. Contour and Silver Airways, when lands are locked out of the sky. These aren't airlines you see in primetime commercials. No luxury lounges, no elite memberships, no business class seats. But they had something far more vital. They were lifelines. For dozens of small towns across America, Contour and Silver Airways weren't options. They were the only way out. They were the bridge to city hospitals, to distant universities, or simply the only link to the nearest highway. But in the summer of 2025, both airlines nearly vanished from the sky map. Contour exited 13 towns in the South and Midwest. Silver shut down all operations in Appalachia and along the Florida Panhandle. The result, 28 towns and cities officially entered a state of air isolation. No more commercial flights. JetBlue had left. United was gone. And now even the carriers flying just once a day quietly disappeared. No headlines, no uproar, but the consequences are very real. Why the government slashed rural air subsidies. Flights that were already operating at a loss became unsustainable. Maintenance costs skyrocketed. Pilots didn't want to accept low pay to fly into places without city lights. And these towns, aging economically stagnant, were suddenly severed from every transportation system except the old car in the garage. They call America the land of freedom. But are you still free when the nearest airport is 6 hours away and no one will fly you out, even if you can pay? Do you have any choice left when there are no planes, no trains, and the nearest hospital is in another state? These towns weren't bombed. They weren't hit by disaster. They were shut out by the market itself. No one attacked them. They were simply forgotten. And so the people left behind look up at the sky, a sky that once roared with jet engines every morning, and wait for something they know won't return. Contour and Silver weren't betrayers. They were the ones who turned off the lights at the end. But America no longer waits for anyone to switch off the lights. It just grows colder, one region at a time. And yet the despair doesn't end here. Because this time it's not the quiet rural towns being left behind. It's the transatlantic gates, the bridges that once carried history, hope, and humanity. And they're starting to close too. And this time,
It's the British who shut the door.
9. British Airways, when an old friend no longer wants to visit.
They were once a simple refined flights connecting London to America's East Coast like a time bridge across the Atlantic. But starting in early 2025, British Airways began pulling out of strategic destinations in the United States. They drastically cut flights to Newark, the gateway to New York, and fully withdrew from Baltimore, once a favorite landing spot for British travelers fond of American history. No press conference, no official explanation, just loyal passengers noticing the shift tickets became harder to buy. Routes were merged into other European hubs, flight durations extended, and non-stop options quietly disappeared. The story behind it is simple but dangerously clear. The U.S. is no longer worth scheduling around. Skyrocketing airport fees, rising security taxes, and growing social instability have made many British travelers feel uneasy about coming to America, especially after the extended protests and unrest in 2024. A man from Manchester once told BBC, "I used to enjoy visiting Washington every fall, but not anymore. It's no longer peaceful, no longer welcoming. I go to Tokyo, Madrid, or Bangkok, and I feel far more at ease." The British don't need to make noise. They just need a reason not to return. And for British Airways, cutting routes wasn't just a business move, it was a signal of deeper cracks in political trust and psychological comfort when a longtime ally begins to question the safety, the stability, and the meaning of staying close to America. And if even the British, known for their loyalty and quiet resolve, also choose another path, then who will still stay? There is still one more name. An airline long regarded as the standard for flawless service and timeless quality. But they are not staying out of courtesy. They are withdrawing, for a reason colder than anyone has dared to admit. 10. Singapore Airlines. When even perfection can no longer tolerate chaos.
Singapore Airlines never acts on impulse. Every move they make stems from long-term planning, meticulous calculations, and cost analysis down to every mile flown. And that's exactly why, when they announced the cancellation of all non-stop flights to Seattle and Houston in mid-2025, the global aviation industry took notice. This was not a temporary shift. It was a clear signal from one of the world's most respected airlines. The official reason appeared in their Q1 2025 financial report. Operating costs in the U.S. rose by 28%, while expected profits dropped 1% compared to Asia. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Behind them lies a more subtle truth. Travelers from Southeast Asia, once dreaming of the U.S. for education, adventure, and shopping, are now turning to Canada, Japan, or New Zealand. Why? Because those destinations feel easier, more welcoming, and safer. U.S. Airports, once gateways to the global dream, have become spaces of interrogation, excessive paperwork, and for many international visitors, a place where they feel scrutinized or even profiled. For Singapore Airlines, service is more than warm towels and polite smiles. Service is about security, trust, and dignity. They do not fly where passengers feel uneasy. They do not maintain routes where crew members feel pressured. And when they choose to leave, they don't hold a press conference. They simply remove a city from the system. And the world gets the message. America isn't lacking in passengers. But today's travelers are not yesterday's dreamers. Those who once flew to imagine a better life have now learned to dream elsewhere. And Singapore Airlines is simply the one taking them there. When a country loses external connections, it's a warning.
But when the interior begins to fracture, when domestic airlines retreat, towns are abandoned, and global routes vanish without notice, it is no longer a shift. It is a reshaping of the global map, where America is no longer the default destination. Just one of many options, and fewer are choosing it.